On behalf of the Women's International Forum's Executive Board, a very warm welcome to our November event. For those who are new to WIF and just joining us today, my name is Zarina Varukati, and I'm the president of the Women's International Forum, and I'm from Singapore. We are privileged today to have with us Professor Marina Niforos, affiliate professor at HEC Business School, joining us from Paris. Thank you, Marina. With New York Times this Sunday using the headline, "Crypto is Cool," while reporting on the non-fungible token conference in Manhattan and the newly elected mayor of New York asking to be paid in crypto, we thought it's timely to address the topic of blockchain, specifically how blockchain can be more accessible to women. Before I give the floor to Marina, I just want to beg your indulgence to speak very briefly about WIF and the work we do. So WIF is a speakers forum, and we have been in existence since 1975. Our objective is to provide a platform for diverse and powerful conversations on issues of global importance and related to the work of the United Nations. And WIF's executive board, which does the work, is made up of professional women from different member countries of the United Nations, namely, besides Singapore, Mauritius, Colombia, Australia, Belgium, Namibia, Paraguay, Slovakia, Canada, Ecuador, and the USA. And our membership includes professional women from New York and women from the Diplomatic Corps. And our events are held once a month. And if you haven't become a member, please do join us. Send us an email at womeninternationalforum@gmail.com. And we will send you the membership form, or you can visit us on our website and download the form. And now it gives me a great pleasure to invite our board member, Tracy Tokuhama Espinoza from Ecuador, to introduce our speaker, Marina. Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Serena. It is really an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Marina Niforos to you all. We've known each other for around 20 years, and I've had the pleasure of watching her evolve both personally and professionally, given her career trajectory as well as her three beautiful, amazing, intellectually gifted young daughters. There's many different ways, many words I could use to introduce her. But if I had to choose one characteristic that I hope all of you walk away from this talk thinking about, it's to consider her as someone who has got a lot of intellectual courage. And I'll explain that with two little examples, one from her personal life and one professionally. Personally, I said we've known each other for 20 years, but our husbands actually went to grade school together in the German school in Ecuador. And so they knew each other for a long time. But after they got married and Marina began having her children, we visited them in Paris I interviewed her for a book I was writing on raising multilingual children. And we all know there's huge benefits, intellectual benefits to having more than one language, along with cultural benefits and other things. But at the time, it wasn't that popular. So here's Marina teaching her daughters to speak Greek and read Greek and talking to them in the middle of the Paris streets and having all these glares, people staring at her, right? As well as family members who say, how can you have Greek and Spanish and English and French at the same time? You're going to confuse these kids. But she was intellectually courageous. She knew the facts, she knew what was right, and that gave her the courage to do something that was going against the trends, but that she knew was right. I have to say that she's also extended this into her professional life, and this has to do with today's topic related to blockchain. She was courageous in not only identifying that this is a trend that's changing our world, but she actually ends up being somebody I would consider in the good group. When I think of blockchain, it's a confusion for a lot of us. We don't know really what it means yet. How is this impacting things? And most of the time, as Zarina pointed out, we're thinking about business ventures, or we're thinking about maybe politics or supply chains or people gambling on the internet with Bitcoin or things like that. That's one way to think of blockchain. But then there's people who are using their imaginations, and some are doing it in the bad way and some are doing it for good. And Marina is somebody doing it for good. There's some people using blockchain in a bad way to do things like, black market trading and things like that, and ransomware and things that gun trafficking or drugs. These are negative ways that some of these things are being used. But what I love about Marina and her intellectual courage is that she's decided to use her imagination for good. She's been looking at things about how to integrate blockchain into climate change impacting, or how could we actually reduce poverty. And her papers in 2017 with the World Bank really set the tone for how the International Monetary Fund, or how the International Finance Corporation is actually modifying or making recommendations to countries about how to do things such as empower women using blockchain technology. So I think there's somebody very special in our midst today, and I hope we can learn a lot from you, Marina. I know we will learn a lot from you, but it's also very special to note that your intellectual courage also extends to the space of being one of the only, I believe, women actually doing research and work in this field. And I think it's very inspirational for all of us. And I thank you for being here, and can't wait to hear more. Starting with, what is blockchain? If you could just begin with the basics, because I think we all struggle with that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I might say it's both an honor and a pleasure to be here today amongst all of you. Greetings from Paris, by the way. We have a few hours difference. So for us, it's an afternoon. For you, it's the morning. So thank you for making the time to be here, to have this conversation together. A special thanks to Zarina and the executive board of the organization for creating this opportunity and allowing me to speak here in front of you today. And a most heartfelt thank you, a personal one also, to Tracy, because I think that's about the nicest introduction I've had to any keynote or talk I've ever given, because usually they stay on the formal credentials and they never congratulate me for my beautiful daughters. And I think that's one of my greatest accomplishments, if I can claim that. So thank you very much. So talking about blockchain. So maybe I should tell you a few words of how I got into blockchain, because I was not necessarily, a shoe in, if you have it. As you've seen from my bio that has been shared, my background is mostly, I'm an economist, and I've worked in strategy after doing my MBA, mostly on finance and corporate VCs. I worked in academia for a while. But I've always been sort of on the more traditional side of the economy, although interested in how technology kept evolving after, I'm old enough to have seen the early days of the internet, seeing it evolve, and then arriving to the emergence of all these new, very disruptive technologies. We have a lot of sort of coin names for deep tech, disruptive tech, emerging tech. But in a sense, I think we're living in a very interesting time where a lot of sort of emerging technologies are coming to head in converging and creating sort of an accelerated pace of innovation. It's not that we hadn't seen innovation in the past, but now I think we're seeing a much more accelerated pace. So my personal history with blockchain, and I don't know if it's intellectual courage or just being a little bit eccentric. So about 6 years ago, when I sort of ventured off and I was advising a lot of startups in the fintech space. So this was the sort of the early years of blockchain. I came across to some of the practitioners, if you have it. So some of the first early stage startups that were starting to experiment with blockchain. And I had the same question that Tracy has put in front of me today. I said, well, what is blockchain? because I think there's been a lot of confusion. And despite the fact that we're almost 6 years after the fact since I first got involved back in 2014, I would say, there's still a lot of confusion as to what is a Bitcoin, what are cryptocurrencies, what is blockchain, is it one and the same? Some people refer to blockchain also as distributed ledger technology, which is, let's say, the more descriptive, functionally descriptive term for the technology. But in a sense, if I have to use a very simple way to explain what it is. So blockchain is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just the first manifestation of what the technology can do. If you recall, it became, let's say, it went live in 2009. It was in the midst of a huge global financial crisis where, we were all laboring under the potential threat of a collapse of the traditional financial system. There was a lot of loss of trust into sort of central bank managed currencies at the time. And in the midst of all that comes the paper from Satoshi Nakamoto, which explains how this new currency, which does not require a central bank, a central authority for its regulation, comes into life by using this technology that is effectively what we call blockchain. So what is it really? In very simple terms, it is a ledger. So you say, this is too simple. What is it? I mean, we've had ledgers since the Genovese, invented the accounting system and the first rudimentary banking, institutions. Well, it is not very different. It is a digital ledger, so it's a database, all right? But that functions in like a distributed network. So databases we've had for a long time, and a lot of the systems of managing data today are through centralized databases. So the innovation of blockchain is that database is now completely distributed. It means that it does not require a centralized authority or a third party for verification purposes. Okay, it's a peer-to-peer network. This is what we call a peer-to-peer network. So what does that actually mean? It means that a host of computers called nodes, they can represent economic participants, or they can only be used as a mechanism for, let's say, verifying transactions. They might not be actually participants of an economic transaction, but this is the underlying technological layer of blockchain. And this can facilitate the recording of transactions, mostly financial. This was where a lot of the experimentation happened in the beginning, and still actually a lot of the use cases that we see, a lot of the applications of blockchain technology still focus on financial services, whether that's, digital wallets or payments or remittances or trade finance, some form of financial transaction that needs to be recorded. So how does it work? The innovation of the blockchain is that it uses that decentralized network of computers called nodes to cryptographically secure and record those data. Okay, and once that information has been put on the ledger, it's called what we call immutable. It means you cannot go back and re-engineer or falsify, let's say, that kind of data, which also provides guarantees against potential fraud. The fact that it works like, as its name indicates, blockchain, so a chain, so transactions, information is presented to the network of collaborating computers in blocks. And then those blocks, once they've been verified by the network, the transaction is what we call timestamped. Okay, so it's the moment we verify it, it is timestamped and it's put in a chain. So any further transactions actually connect as blocks. And this is what forms the blockchain, because it's a series of blocks that then sequentially are actually connected to one another. Why is that important as well? Because not only you secure the transaction, but you actually sequentially can follow it through. this is very important when we're going to go looking at the use cases that we can discuss. You can actually have traceability and a custody of the data, not just knowing that a transaction happened at a specific point in time, but you can follow it through, right? So that's another, let's say, advantage and an innovation of a blockchain network. And third, which happened, let's say, in an innovation that happened a few years after Bitcoin with the introduction of Ethereum, was the introduction of what we call a more flexible arrangement. Again, all these are algorithmic, right? The consensus process, the way that the transactions get verified is through a network of computers that solve intense mathematical equations. Okay, they're highly complex. This is the process of mining. It's what we call mining. And it's through this process of a combination of, if you have a game theory and cryptography, which I've invested 6 years, I still don't understand completely, and will avow to you, I don't know exactly how it works. But as a very interesting article, which I will share with you at the end, for those who wish to go a little further, is by two professors in Harvard. Let's say it's Ianciti and Lacani. They wrote it back to 2016. And so they're more strategy professors. They're at the business school at Harvard. And it's called The Truth About Blockchain. And they tried to do sort of an analysis of the importance of blockchain by using as a proxy the evolution of the internet. And at the end, they say, just like at the underlying protocol technology of the internet, the TCP, nobody really knows it's there. What you want as a user is the assurance that it works, right? So I think that's sort of the interesting part is the potential. And I'm passing now to the second question that I think Tracy put on the table. I mean, why should we care? This sounds like some very arcane, extremely complicated computational process that is happening a little bit in the margins with cryptocurrencies. And, I don't want to be a trader. Does it actually really impact my life? Does it impact mainstream economy? And I would say resoundingly yes. And I hope to explain to you why I think that is the case. Mm-hmm. So in a blockchain-enabled network, we can register transactions for both tangible assets, so the real physical assets like cars or land or physical assets, but we can also record transactions for intangible assets such as intellectual property or copyrights or other things like that. So we see that it has great versatility. And again, I'll go back to that article from 2017 of Ianciti and Lacani, because I thought that is still very compelling today, because they describe the potential of blockchain as not being merely disruptive. Okay, because disruptive, we say it's a technology that actually comes, attacks an incumbent, and proposes some very, very important but incremental changes for lowering costs and barriers to entry to new participants. The difference with blockchain is that it can be a foundational technology. What does that mean? Those are very rare. They're technological innovations that actually have the capacity to re-engineer our entire economic ecosystems. The way we think about the organization of economic activity and possibly also societal activity, I would put it, right? So if you think about what kind of foundational technologies like the steam engine or the internet before it, right? The World Economic Forum has always a very good way with words and have made blockchain as one of the cornerstones of what they call the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure some of you have read a lot about it and, what does it actually mean? We could have a huge discussion about that. But in a nutshell, it's the convergence of several pillars of technological innovation that is coming together and is creating what I call the perfect storm, meaning they start to work in an articulated fashion rather than independently one from another. Think artificial intelligence, think Internet of Things, think blockchain, they start working together. And when they start working together to reinforce each other's efficiencies, that's where we see the most radical innovation taking place. So what blockchain proposes to do, and again, I put a caveat here because still the technology is in its early stages of development. And so we have been through a lot of discussions about it can do everything and solve all the problems to it's complete hype and it's not going to last 2 years. And I would venture to say the truth is in between. So it has tremendous potential, but it's not there yet. So it does have the potential to do for the exchange of information that the internet did. Okay, what the internet did for democratizing the exchange of information, blockchain promises to do for the exchange of value. Now, what that means is that it can provide what I would put in two main categories. Okay, one is a value creation driver that's based on improving efficiency of the way we do business, of the way we do economic transactions. Why? Because it has the greatest capacity for disintermediation, meaning I take out all transaction costs that I can. Why can I do that? Because I can provide a shared source of truth, okay, shared source of truth, which is what we discussed before, shared in real time by all the economic participants. The data cannot be tampered. So, issues about falsifying or going back and sort of tampering with transactions is not so easy. You cannot do that very easily. It would require a collusion of more than 51% of the collaborating nodes in a network to go back and undo a transaction that has been timestamped. So it's virtually impossible. And so therefore, think about all the duplication that you have, the bureaucratic layers, the double duplication of systems and copies that can happen because we can't do the transaction custody other than in a sequential manner. So going from one to the other, to the other, to the other. So one is on driving sort of more efficiency in our different business processes. And the second is driving more transparency. It's what I call the transparency dividend. What does that mean? It means that we can now see not only A to Z, but we can see whatever a physical or a digital asset has been throughout its journey. So to bring the example home, I use an anecdote of, something of an experiment that actually Walmart, which created a food trust consortium with other food industry players. They did an experiment on blockchain about tracing a crate of mangoes from one of their producing farms to, a distribution network on the other side of the country. And in order to try to verify at the end of that, let's say, real supply chain, where had the mango crate come from and where it had been, it would have required about 3 days. By doing that on a blockchain with a digital identity for the physical asset, they were able to do that in 10 seconds. Now imagine what are the efficiencies of that. If, let's say, you have a breakout of a food scare, of E. coli or all the things that have happened to the food industry in the past with, huge damages, collateral damage for the company, human lives, etc., and how the potential for that. So extrapolate from that, the fact that you could use that to verify also, for consumers, for users, for citizens who are now demanding much more about the provenance of goods, of how they were produced, whether there's labor-free, child labor-free, fair trade, sustainability compliant. Now you have a mechanism that I can actually go with a deep lens and efficiently and quickly give you access to the provenance of that information so that it can be visible to the final consumer. That can have enormous value also for the corporations that are under pressure to deliver that to their customers, to their other stakeholders also, employees who are asking for different higher standards on all of that. Think about the pharma industry. This is also in the paper that we did on leveraging sustainable supply chains for the IFC, where we looked at pharma. When you look at the amount of counterfeit drugs, the loss to the pharma industry and the loss in human lives annually, the World Health Organization has estimated about more than 100,000 deaths annually due to illegal or counterfeit drugs. And this is a particular pressing problem for developing economies, where half of the antibiotic and anti-malarial drugs that find their ways to consumers are counterfeit. The kind of collateral damage that can have in human cost, but also economic cost, because of people losing work days, of the destruction in their in their personal lives, and loss of income, et cetera, it's huge. So now you can actually combine an IoT device, let's say an RFD tag or something, and you know exactly where, from the producer to the distributor to the consumer to the patient, where that drug has been and whether it's actually illicitly produced and not real or real. So I could go on and on. There are use cases in energy, there are use cases. So I hope I've just given you a little flavor, and I'll stop perhaps there, because we can have a conversation about it. And I know that Zarina also had some questions she wanted to put on the table for us to discuss together. So I'll leave it there, and maybe we'll discuss later on a bit more the use cases.
Thank you very much, Marina. You've given us such a clear and a good explanation of what the blockchain technology is and its potential. And you've also given us a lot to chew on and mull over. I would like to start with a question. But before that, I just wanted to say to everyone that if you would like to ask a question, this is an interactive part of the forum. So if you have questions for Marina, please indicate your name in the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a box that says chat. You can just put your name there, and I will call you in the order that your name appears. Right. So to start off, Marina, perhaps we can talk about one aspect of it is gender. When we talk about technological revolutions, how do we ensure that this deep tech also works for women, and how do we bring in more women in into the crypto and blockchain industry?
So this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue because we would like to drive efficiency and transparency, but we're hoping that the growth that's going to come out of the new business models would be inclusive as well, right? And that means inclusive also for women. So in the work we did in the IFC report, there was a dedicated section on supply chains, looking particularly on what the impact of the technology can have on women and women-led enterprises, okay, who usually happen to be at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So if we look a little bit about the data about women globally, so these are like not necessarily developing or developed country figures, but if we look globally, approximately 10 million women-owned small SMEs, small medium enterprises around the globe, okay, that's an astounding number. 30% of all SMEs in emerging markets are women-held SMEs, okay, at the helm at least. 70% of these women-owned enterprises are either unbanked or underbanked, meaning they lack significantly access to financial services and to capital. And so the data, and then again, this is also work that has been done by the OECD, by the IFC from their gender sort of gender analytics divisions, etc. The finance gap for women-led enterprises is roughly 300 billion a year. 300 billion a year. It's a very difficult gap to fill, considering also the conditions of, in many, let's say, developing countries, that after the financial crisis of 2008 and increased regulation, one of the unintended consequences of the increased regulation was that the enforceability of compliance was very difficult in some areas where, record keeping and sort of KYC, know your customer procedures were difficult, and therefore not any more profitable for many banking institutions, at least traditional banking institutions. This is what we call the de-risking spin that a lot of developing countries found themselves in, meaning that they did not have any more banking institutions willing to serve certain segments of the population, in some cases entire countries, like it happened in some Caribbean countries. So what we have here is an opportunity also huge for financial inclusion of women as heads of businesses, and also I would say also as female headed households, because it's also a personal issue. It's not just from a business perspective, but they're also the personal perspective, because obviously putting financial means in the hands of these women has a positive collateral effects for the entire, from their families to their communities to their economies. We all know the important role women play and actually have a multiplier positive effect on their economies by spending more on health, on education, et cetera, et cetera. So access to financial services, products like microinsurance, savings, et cetera, is considered one of the major barriers to growth for women-owned businesses, and then all the other issues that we discussed. Mm-hmm. This is also particularly pressing in the agricultural sector. That's why we chose also the food, and ag sector as one where we looked into it as a use case. But they represent 40% of the agricultural labor force, women globally. And that is 20% in the Americas, but it gets to be up to 50% in Africa and in Asia. So we see that it becomes very important in certain areas about what a huge segment they represent to the economy. So in terms of finding tools where we can improve the profitability, put into their hands better access to finance, okay, and also providing them with the means to have that accessibility. So blockchain provides an opportunity for that. How? First, because of its potential to be able to establish a digital identity in a much more cost-efficient way. That may sound a bit perfunctory, but if you think that KYC is the main reason why the financial institutions cannot serve many populations, including women, having a digital identity where you can set establish, let's say, credit persona on digital finance, that actually helps you build the credit history as a woman-led enterprise, and then you can have access to even more services. So having a cost-efficient, easy way to have a digital identity that can be verifiable by institutions who provide those financial services is one major way of doing it. It can also help them establish official ownership of, let's say, land titling and ownership, which is very difficult. I mean, this has been identified by several World Bank reports that, titling issues and the difficulty women have sometimes because of very pernicious laws or because of cumbersome procedures. Here you can have, and it has been experimented in Ghana and elsewhere, putting the entire land registries on a blockchain and providing better services to the citizens. In this case, making it easier for women to own and then, of course, transact on land because it's used as collateral to obtain credit, et cetera, et cetera. So, and last but not least, it's a tool. So it's a tool in this sort of explosion, if you have it. We heard it at the COP26 that just took place with respect to the E, but that's not that the ESG explosion of the last 2 years has an S in it, and gender is under S. So this has an important compliance requirements, an important also strategic objective for many corporations, from businesses worldwide, for asset managers to show that they're actually putting a lot more capital to support these types of objectives, such as inclusion and gender inclusion. But we lack the means to actually have the enforceability for those standards. So blockchain here provides a mechanism for the type of public registry where these would be both publicly available and publicly scrutinized, so that you can actually then, as a citizen or as an NGO or even as a company, you can actually say, here's what I'm doing, and you can go and verify. We were discussing when we were preparing here with Tracy that the World Bank, who launched the Blockchain Lab a few years ago, and I had the pleasure to be there for the launch, is now launching an initiative to connect climate markets together and putting a public blockchain where using sort of the blockchain technology, create a registry for sovereigns, utilities, and other players. And I'm happy to say the government of Singapore is leading the way. Zarina, thank you. In order to provide a mechanism for sovereigns and other sort of public organizations to disclose their data and therefore provide, a transparent record of that.
Thank you so much, Marina. I'd like to call on some of our participants who have indicated that they want to ask questions. Please unmute yourselves and identify yourselves. First is Betty Robbins, and after that followed by Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina and Tracy, and particularly Marina, for a very clear presentation on something that I came into this not understanding at all. I have a question born of your saying that there was even any aspect that you had studied for 6 years and you didn't understand completely. And that's whether the blockchain can be manipulated by people intentionally to harm vulnerable groups, or whether it can be impacted by power failures that also are manipulated. And I would say, as a variant of that, whether anyone can use the blockchain as a mechanism to hide their identity and therefore try to get around being taxed in their own jurisdiction.
So Betty, yes, to all your above questions, the blockchain has been used for nefarious purposes. There was an early case in 2017, I think, where, it was used by the dark web for the illicit trafficking of drugs and weapons. The FBI actually was able to identify them despite using the pseudonymity of the network to hide the transactions. To your other question, yes, some people can hide behind pseudonymity, and it can be used as a tax evasion if you have a mechanism, if there's no proper regulation. And I mean regulation also in a more sort of global context, because, that is the difficulty. And perhaps we can discuss about, the issues of regulation. But when you have a globally distributed network, how do you regulate it if your regulator has only a national mandate? Mm-hmm. So, this is a complex issue. Okay, we're still, I think, all struggling trying to find answers on how can we actually balance the benefits of having this kind of, completely distributed, decentralized networks, because there are huge economic benefits and empowerment of the individual as an economic participant, but also as a citizen. You think about voting mechanisms that are completely transparent on blockchain, but it can be turned around to be used for also nefarious purposes if we don't have some kind of an agreement or collaboration, perhaps also with law enforcement, authorities. And for example, in the US, there has been such an initiative, such as the Digital Chamber of Commerce in DC, who's invited law enforcement agencies to interact with industry. So there's sort of public-private initiatives that are getting together to try to get all the stakeholders to sit around the table and say, we know we need to balance the good things with the bad things. Let's put our heads together and think, how can we solve this conundrum? Because we all want it to advance. We don't want to stifle innovation, but we also want to put some legal boundaries and clarity, because also you have to think at the end of the day, there's no legal clarity and there's no protection. Investors are not going to crowd in. So this will remain sort of kind of a fringes type of technology that we can sort of discuss at dinner parties, but it won't have a massive effect in the economy.
Thank you.
Miriam?
Thank you very much. This has absolutely been fascinating. Thank you, Zarina and Tracy, and of course, Marina. So I have two questions. One was if you could explain briefly what exactly Bitcoin is then, if there's time, but more importantly, even since I'm very oriented towards the COP26 conference going on now. And I wondered how, most importantly, blockchain, this whole technology can help to combat the climate crisis and the ecocide we're seeing going on at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. So let me take on first your question about Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is basically the first form of cryptocurrency. And like I said before, it's the first manifestation of how blockchain technology can work. It was done very specifically in a given historical context to, let's say, provide an alternative to a crumbling central bank-backed currency. So the idea was, okay, if our financial system is collapsing and our central banks cannot control anymore, money supply, they're not a guarantee for money anymore in the sense of a fiat, okay, then we need an alternative that will not depend on any particular central authority, that will be peer-to-peer. So that's what Bitcoin is, actually. It's a peer-to-peer currency that does not have a central authority. Now, Bitcoin, there's so much written about it. It has gone up and down. It has been the object of speculation. A lot of people now, okay, that was the first, but now I would say there's a plethora of other cryptocurrencies. So there's a huge innovation, and if we could have like several hours of discussions just on the cryptocurrencies. It's not my favorite subject of predilection because I'm neither a trader, and I would say, perhaps I'm too old, but I have a little bit of an aversion of things that I do not completely understand how they work. And so when I see, let's say, that even the developer community is underlying some of these things with stable coins, there have been some allegations that can be manipulated, like Betty said before. I kind of think that, I don't think Bitcoin will go away. I don't like to speculate whether it's going to, appreciate or depreciate, because that's also not my role. But we are seeing an increased interest, I would say, in general in cryptocurrencies because of, let's say, concerns about increased inflation. We might be seeing ahead because we've, and justifiably so, governments around the world have been putting fiscal stimulus packages out there to try to help get us out of the pandemic. But eventually that's going to have some kind of expected, at least from the central banks, unintended collateral effects on increased inflation. So a lot of people saying, well, maybe we need to be putting money on cryptocurrencies.
Thank you.
There's also a lot of discussions about central bank digital currencies and whether they're, is that the real question? Should we be going for that? Should we be going for stable coins? So I will just close that parenthesis and I will focus on the second part, your second question, which was, how can we use blockchain for good? And yes. I think that's what I'm going back to the initial question. For me, I was frustrated in seeing that most of the applications we're seeing early on, and unfortunately, we still see a lot of applications focusing on that, is how can we use this very quickly and in a very speculative mode? Instead of putting it in solving some real intractable problems, such as how can we get convergence in our climate mitigation efforts. And the COP26 made huge, there were lots of ideas, there were commitments made, there were, I think there's some goodwill and some not so goodwill. But let's say that there is goodwill.
Yes.
We need tools to do that. Okay, and there's a market failure when it comes to certain things because our markets have not been structured to account for those externalities that, are I'm not going to go into it, but that need some kind of a pricing mechanism and need disclosure that's transparent and auditable. So if you put those needs next to what the blockchain promises to do, which is to give you a ledger that can be transparent, auditable, and immutable, if we can only agree on a common methodology and transpose it on the blockchain, I think we will already have gone a big step in trying to flush out at least what I think is a lot of greenwashing around all of these things, and hold the people who make commitments accountable to their performance.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it's a short question. We could be talking a lot. You can contact me later.
Okay.
I'm talking on this for hours.
You got it. Okay, thank you.
That can be another WIF talk. It's by itself, climate and blockchain.
Yes, and for women, with climate, change is impacting so disproportionately. This is a huge issue.
Yes.
Thank you. We have 3 more people who have indicated they have questions. I hope Marina is okay with the time.
Yes, of course.
Great. So we have first Aisha from Turkey, and after that, Yiling, followed by Yoshiko.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Serena and Tracy and Marina. This is a very, very important subject because I think it is the future. And but we are, at least on my behalf, we are very illiterate about it. Maybe we need more sessions. It could be just the beginning. If we want more inclusive, let's say blockchain, we should, have these discussions more often in order to, let's say, integrate more women into the benefits of the blockchain. But I have a question, because this is, maybe we can we define this blockchain as decentralization of power, and it is a very still the early stage, and the governments are silent and they are seeing the positive sides of it, but at the same time there will be one point they will be very reluctant to relieve, to give up their power to decentralized authorities, which is called blockchain. And there will be a clash of, let's say, interests, maybe, because governments will never like to give up their authority, their power. How you see the future? Because maybe, it is very early to speculate anything for the future, but it looms in the future, I guess. And the second, of course, the most important question about blockchain, especially Bitcoin, all these, new innovations, they are using excessive energy. Yes. And we are talking about, climate change. We are talking about using the blockchain as a platform, let's say, to benefit from it for the climate, for the sake of climate change. But there is a paradox, in fact, 2 opposing sides. Maybe these are big topics to reflect upon it, but these are just the questions that have come to my mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisha. No, I think they're 2 extremely important questions, and thanks for raising them, because this is something I always try to address, because you're right. The mining mechanism that is currently the most predominant, which is, mostly the Bitcoin one, and now Ethereum is trying to phase out of it into proof of stake. So what's the predominant current mining mechanism? It's proof of work, which requires very intense computational, process to verify transactions. And this has, very nefarious effects in terms of the kind of energy consumption that requires. So I don't remember, and I don't want to be misquoting, but something like, the day's operation of the entire Bitcoin network is the consumption of Sweden in energy. Right. So this is a huge concern, and it's also something that the industry of blockchain has to address, and they're very conscious of it. So the powers that be there, the developing gurus, are trying, like I said, to address it by going from proof of work to proof of stake. That also has sort of, unfortunately, none of these things are without trade-offs. So, that lowers the energy consumption, but it requires staking financially, which might lead to sort of a divide in terms of who actually can participate in the network. Because if you have to have financial means in order to, participate in the verification process, then that would exclude de facto a lot of people. There's the Chia network, which is the one that the World Bank is doing a prototype for the climate markets, have also an alternative, which they called proof of time and space. And so they're proposing to use sort of dormant storage space in people's computers to try to, activate it and use that as sort of kind of a verification mechanism. So these are very, very arcane, and I'm not sure I even understand exactly how they work, but I just know that each of them offer a solution to the previous problem. Unfortunately, they come with some negative consequences on the other. On your question, again, very important one about the conflict between centralization and central authority. And I would open your parenthesis, which is governments will be against it. I would say that even corporations are not exactly keen on it. And it's a perfect natural reaction to such a radical new system of thinking, of organizing economic activity and also organizing social activity. Okay, by social, I mean political, socio-political. Let's put it like that. We're not prepared for it. In fact, when we wrote the first series of papers at the IFC, we revisited 2 years later, and I wrote the paper on regulation and governance. And under governance, I challenged the fact that, our corporate governance system is still hierarchical. So it reflects a centrally managed pyramid. What happens if you have a distributed network like the distributed the DAOs, the decentralized organizations, where there's no board of directors? How do you make decisions? This is the complete opposite effect of a centralized company or centralized authority. So yes, I think we're early on. I think there's going to be friction. I think probably we're going to see hybrid models. We're not going to go immediately to the DAOs, okay? And we're going to have to negotiate, I think, also in terms of some of the benefits with some of the negative effects, because, again, I think there's a certain degree of patience that should be exercised. People always, in the beginning now, I think people are a little more moderate in their criticisms. They say, but blockchain is not delivering results. Okay, if it's so promising and foundational, why it's not doing more? Well, we have to remember that the internet came into being as a protocol in 1972 in ARPANET, the predecessor of DARPA in the US, and it became a first e-commerce model in the 1990s with the World Wide Web. So it takes time for technology to have a maturity from the organizational side that can adapt to it, and then mature, and then acceptance comes, and then you have sort of a more economies of scale effect. I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered. It was a bit overarching, but yeah, it's very big questions, and I try to give very short answers, but it's impossible. Thank you, Aisha, for the question.
Thank you. Yiling?
Okay, thank you, President Zarina, and thank you for Tracy. And I have really excited today's wonderful time. I joined WAVE more than 10 years. I think this is like my few questions I'm with my hands, because I feel today's event is very special, very important, because blockchain, maybe some of people don't know blockchain. I attend some events about the blockchain, even the UN before pandemic. And also I have some friends, they do the blockchain, but they are all of young age. They're so exciting. I think we are so lucky living this beautiful central world. A lot of challenging, a lot of change, a lot of good benefits. So even last week I'm supported the new mayor to election, Eric Adams. So he won the 2022 mayor 4 years. So we are so happy. And his first questions or his first message delivered the people. He said, I want to make the New York is the biggest city in the world. It's block the Bitcoin city, because now America only Florida to do the test, the Bitcoin city. And now our new mayor, Eric, say, I want to make the New York be the big one, the Florida and in the world, the big one. That means I think it's big opportunity, big, beautiful new things coming. So, of course, like you said, the new things, we have the positive way, good way, also have some negative way. So I saw that most people, young people knows blockchain, but to our age or even the younger than me, when I deliver the message to blockchain, and the people don't know what means blockchain. So I'm very appreciated today, our president and Marina to give us education. This, I think maybe in future we can do more things, because this is the most important. I remember, like you said, 20 years ago, I don't know, Chinese, the number one richest guy, Jackie Ma, 20 years ago, he's only college teacher, English teacher, because he have a stepmother, father's American. He came here under the internet and the computer. 20 years after he do the computer things, he be the richest guy in the world. So that means I think this is a good opportunity to everybody get the good life and a good job, good chance. My questions is what you think, Marina, from now to everybody like a computer now, everybody home have a computer. We do the computer, use the computer like a daily life every day. So I believe future will coming soon. Blockchain will be like a computer. So you think from now to that time is how many years? And my second questions, because sorry, it's a little bit long, my questions, because we didn't educate by professional way. What are your suggestions? Which way we can learn to be not left behind? That everybody will be follow this great time. And also appreciate again, hope future can discuss this kind of event more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yiling. And let me say that, I started late in life to get into this. So I don't think age is necessarily an obstacle. I think if you're curious and you're obviously, Yiling, you're passionate about it, you see the potential, I think there's a place for everyone. Yes, I do go to events and I'm everyone's mother, but at the same time, they're very open. And I think there's benefit for people who understand also how to combine some of the more, the young people are very much into the technology and the innovation. And some of us who are more tempered by experience are also interested in creating a different legacy and putting it to work for some of the bigger problems, right? Because we've seen them unsolved for so long. We're really eager to see it done quickly. So I think if we get together the younger ones with the experience of the older ones, we're probably going to have some better benefits out of this technology. So to your second one, I guess the question was, how can we learn more? And, there's formal programs abounding. MIT is one of the best, but it requires a lot of work because I looked into it in the beginning. But there's also so much information out there that's available. It's so huge that the problem is making a choice. It's making a choice. So I would say, since blockchain can be used for almost anything, pick what you're passionate about and try to research and find out who's working on the issues that you're interested in. Are you interested in inclusion? Are you interested in climate? Are you interested in sort of, art? the NFTs and art now is a whole new way of conceiving, creating, and owning art. So there's such potential, but you can get lost a little bit in all of this. So I would say pick first your interest and your passion, and then blockchain will follow.
Thank you. We have a last question from Yoshiko. Yoshiko, you're muted. Can you unmute, please?
Thank you very much, Zarina, and thank you very much for organizing this wonderful talk. Marina, you explained very nicely the blockchain being used for, basically transferring money and also for the database. My question is, inclusion, the last thing you mentioned. How expensive is it to use the blockchain system? And in particular, how plausible is it for people in underserved communities to use this system? Thank you.
Well, if you have access to broadband and you have access to a computer, the barriers to entry are zero, because it's expensive for the people who operate and mine, because there are the economic incentives around the verification mechanism. But if you're a user, at least theoretically, there's not so much of barriers to entry. Of course, given the fact that those are not easily accessible in some countries, okay, access to broadband should be a human right these days, because otherwise the digital divide keeps, becoming bigger and bigger. You do require a basic digital skills. That can be an obstacle, right? First of all, the technology has to be user friendly. So the easiest it is to use, so that you don't have to actually interact with the technology itself. It just has to be efficient. It has to work, but it's the user application that should be accessible to the end consumer. But for example, decentralized finance is actually innovating a lot in order to try to serve directly those underserved communities, which, were not sort of profitable for traditional institutions. So if you look, for example, Ant Financial, who has been using it, or BitPesa, in Kenya, where they're basically trying to serve communities that before were completely unbanked and doing it at sort of almost zero marginal cost. I think that the potential there can be tremendous, and the entry layers are minimal. But the problem is that capital has to go to those innovators that want to create those use cases. So it's not enough to have a working blockchain network. Then somebody has to create the use cases that then will target those consumers, will do it with the conditions that make it accessible to them. If you want to, let's say, have the financial services, it cannot be on a smartphone that's an iPhone 13. It has to be on a device that is easily affordable to someone who is making, under $300 a year. So it's sort of more targeting the community of VCs. And I put it again, those who control capital, and you see so much capital flowing into blockchain. In 2020 alone, there's been a 350% increase of VC capital that has gone to these kinds of ventures. What I say to them when I go to these conferences is, can you please put it on something other than kitties or dating apps for your pets? Okay, not that we don't love our pets, but there's significant problems to be solved globally. Make sure also you put VC money into developing the applications that can solve real problems. And unfortunately, the concentration of money in certain areas that are very insular, they're very male-dominated, sorry to say it, that kind of feed off each other in a mimetic way, does not allow it to go into those other applications.
Are you thinking about, so-called digital token, which does not use the blockchain? Do you include that in your
digital token that does not include?
Yes, does not, use the blockchain. Are you thinking about that?
You mean like a digital currency?
Yes, which does not use the blockchain. Sorry,
yes, there are considerations, and the European Central Bank with the European Commission are having a huge consultative process as to whether they should be using, even the project of the digital euro is not set yet. But, if they were to go with a digital euro, which is, a central bank digital currency, that would replace a physical would be a fiat digital currency. Would they use blockchain? Would they use another system? So the debate is still open. I have contributed as a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory, saying that, putting forth the positive things, I think, for blockchain, but it comes with negative things as well. So how open is that blockchain? Who controls access? Is it designed by central agencies? Would the central banks coordinate? How do they interact with other central banks that don't have the same system as they do? So if they have to have an international exchange protocol for these things. So all these things require the international collaboration of regulators, of central banks, because again, you have to have an agreement on these things because we are in a globally interconnected economy. And unless we all agree on the standards, it's going to be like the internet. It took 25 years to get into standards.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina, because you've given us so much to think about. This is such a huge topic, but I think it might even require a follow-up session at some point. But thank you for today's session. I think we have come out of this understanding better what is blockchain, and you've given us a lot of food for thought about making it accessible to women and underprivileged community. So once again, thank you on behalf of the WIF Executive Board and WIF members. Thank you very much. And also thank you to everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you everyone for coming up with such enthusiasm and great questions. And if you have more, don't hesitate. You can ping me on LinkedIn and I can point you to some areas. I think it was Yiling. I can point you to some areas where, if you want further research or you want to dig in for yourself or for your, for your organization.
Do you have a phone number, a website, or can join?
I don't have a website because I'm sort of very atomized.
I think some people
I am on LinkedIn, and you please ping me, and we can exchange afterwards. I'll send you my address.
Yeah, I will send Marina's info if she shares with us to all those who participated today. And I believe there was some information in the chat about, reading up on blockchain and so on. We will send it on in an email to all of you together with the video recording of today's session. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.